The kitchen was quiet, except for the soft tick of the old wall clock. Lisa sat at her wooden table staring at papers that would change everything. 22 years of marriage had just ended with a signature on official documents. At 43, she felt like she was starting life all over again. Her daughter Amy walked into the kitchen, backpack slung over her shoulder, ready for another day at high school. The 17-year-old had been dealing with the family changes better than expected, but Lisa could see the worry in her eyes. "Mom, you're up early again," Amy said, pouring herself a glass of orange juice. "Couldn't sleep much," Lisa replied, gathering the papers into a neat pile. "But I've been thinking about our future." The house felt too big now, filled with memories that hurt to remember. Every corner held pieces of a life that no longer existed. The living room where they used to watch movies together. The backyard, where they had birthday parties. Even the garage still smelled like her ex-husband's aftershave. Lisa had always been practical. She worked as a school teacher for 15 years, saving money bit by bit. She knew how to budget, how to plan, how to make smart choices. But sitting in that quiet kitchen, she realized that being practical hadn't protected her from heartbreak. Maybe it was time to try something different. 3 weeks earlier, during one of her sleepless nights, Lisa had been browsing her laptop, looking at houses in different towns. She wasn't really planning to move, just dreaming about starting fresh somewhere new. That's when she saw the listing that would change everything. Old Vineyard for sale, 15 acres. Needs work, but full of potential. The photos showed rolling hills covered with grapevines, a big old house with character, and mountains in the distance. The price was surprisingly low. Even Lisa could see that. Most houses in their current neighborhood cost 3 times as much for a tiny lot. She showed the listing to Amy the next morning. "Mom, that's really far from here," Amy had said, looking at the location on the map. "Sometimes far away is exactly what we need," Lisa replied. Her sister called that evening, full of concern. "Lisa, you can't be serious about this vineyard idea. You don't know anything about making wine. You've never even grown tomatoes successfully." "I know it sounds crazy," Lisa admitted, "but look at what staying safe and practical got me. Maybe it's time for crazy." Her parents were even more worried when she told them. Her father, who had worked the same job for 35 years, couldn't understand why she would risk everything on something so uncertain. "You have a good teaching job here," he said during their weekly phone call. "Amy has friends at school. Why would you throw that all away for some broken-down farm?" But Lisa had already made up her mind. Something deep inside her felt excited for the first time in years. When she closed her eyes, she could picture herself walking through those grapevines, breathing fresh air, building something with her own hands. The hardest part was telling Amy about her decision. "We're really going to do this?" Amy asked, sitting on her bed surrounded by college brochures. "We don't have to," Lisa said carefully. "If you really don't want to move, we can figure something else out." Amy was quiet for a long moment, looking at the vineyard photos on Lisa's phone. "Actually," she said slowly, "I've been thinking about taking a gap year anyway. Maybe this could be an adventure." Selling everything they owned was more emotional than Lisa expected. Each item that went to the donation center or garage sale represented a piece of their old life. The dining room table where Amy had done homework for years. The couch where they watched countless TV shows together. Even the garden tools that Lisa had barely used felt important when it was time to let them go. The financial advisor thought she had lost her mind. "You're taking your entire retirement savings, Amy's college fund, and the money from selling your house and putting it all into this property?" he asked, reviewing her plans. "What if it doesn't work out?" "What if it does?" Lisa replied. Getting ready for the move took 2 months. Lisa arranged to take a leave of absence from teaching, though she wasn't sure if she'd ever go back. Amy finished her junior year and told her friends she was moving to wine country to help run a vineyard. Most of them thought it sounded exciting, which helped Amy feel better about leaving. The drive to Northern California took 8 hours. Lisa's old car was packed with their remaining belongings, photo albums, and a cooler full of sandwiches. Amy played music and took pictures of the changing landscape as they drove north. "Look how different everything looks," Amy said as they entered wine country. "It's so green and hilly." Lisa felt her heart beating faster as they got closer to their destination. What if the photos had been misleading? What if the place was worse than she imagined? What if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life? The GPS led them down smaller and smaller roads, past established wineries with neat signs and tour buses. Then they turned onto a gravel driveway that seemed to go on forever, winding through overgrown fields. When the house finally came into view, both Lisa and Amy went completely silent. The photos hadn't lied, but they hadn't told the whole truth either. The Victorian house was beautiful in its bones, with tall windows and decorative trim, but it looked like it had been abandoned for years. Paint was peeling everywhere, some windows were boarded up, and the front porch sagged dangerously. The vineyard itself was a jungle. What had once been organized rows of grapevines had grown wild and tangled. Weeds were taller than Amy in some places. An old barn leaned so far to one side that it looked like the next strong wind might knock it over completely. Lisa turned off the car engine and they sat in silence, taking it all in. "Mom," Amy said quietly, "this is really, really bad." Lisa felt tears starting in her eyes, but she blinked them back. They had driven 8 hours and spent every penny they had. There was no going back now. "It's not what I expected," she admitted. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we needed something that would challenge us." They got out of the car and walked toward the house. Lisa pulled the key from her purse, a heavy, old-fashioned key that the previous owner had mailed to her. Her hands were shaking as she tried to unlock the front door. The door stuck at first, swollen from years of weather and neglect. Lisa had to push hard to get it open, and when it finally gave way, they were hit with the musty smell of a house that had been closed up for too long. Inside was better than outside, but not by much. The rooms were large and had good light, but everything needed work. The kitchen hadn't been updated since the 1970s. The bathrooms needed complete replacement. Most of the windows were painted shut. But as they walked through room after room, Lisa started to see possibilities instead of problems. The living room had a beautiful brick fireplace. The kitchen had enough space for a big family table. Upstairs, the bedrooms had views of the mountains. "Look at this," Amy called from what must have been the master bedroom. She was standing at a window that looked out over the vineyard. Despite all the weeds and overgrowth, you could still see the basic shape of the grape rows stretching toward the hills. "Someone loved this place once," Lisa said, joining Amy at the window. "You can tell it was cared for, even if that was a long time ago." They spent the rest of the day exploring the property. The barn was in worse shape than the house, but it was huge and might be salvageable. There was an old well that might still work. Best of all, they found a small cottage behind the main house that seemed to be in better condition than anything else. "We could live in the cottage while we fix up the big house," Lisa suggested. As the sun started to set, they sat on the front porch steps, eating sandwiches and trying to process everything. "Are you scared?" Amy asked. "Terrified," Lisa admitted, "but also excited. I haven't felt excited about anything in years." That night they slept on air mattresses in the cottage, listening to unfamiliar sounds outside their windows. Owls calling to each other, wind through the grapevines, the settling sounds of old buildings. Lisa lay awake for hours, wondering what she had gotten them into. Her bank account was nearly empty. The house needed thousands of dollars in repairs before it would be safe to live in. She didn't know the first thing about growing grapes or making wine, but somewhere in the darkness she could almost hear the voice of whoever had built this place originally. Someone who had believed in this land enough to plant grapevines and build a house and dream of making something beautiful. Maybe that someone had been waiting all these years for Lisa and Amy to arrive. Maybe some dreams are worth the risk, even when you can't see how they'll work out. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Lisa made herself a promise. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't give up easily. She had already lost one life. This time, she was going to fight for the one she wanted to build. The first month at the vineyard tested every bit of strength Lisa thought she had. She and Amy were living in the small cottage while contractors worked on making the main house safe to enter. Every morning brought new problems and bigger bills than expected. The electrician found wiring so old it was dangerous to touch. The plumber discovered pipes that had been leaking inside the walls for years. The roof had 3 different spots where rain was getting through, and winter was coming, fast. Lisa sat at her laptop every evening, watching her bank account get smaller and smaller. She had budgets and spreadsheets, but the numbers never seemed to work out the way she hoped. Some nights she wondered if they would end up living in their car before Christmas. Amy tried to stay positive, but Lisa could see the worry on her daughter's face too. The nearest town was 20 minutes away, and Amy didn't know anyone their age. She spent most of her time taking photos of the property and posting them online, trying to document their adventure. "Look at this," Amy said, one morning showing Lisa her phone. "My post about us moving here got 500 likes. People think what we're doing is really cool." Lisa smiled, grateful that someone thought their situation was cool because most days it just felt overwhelming. The breakthrough came during their 3rd week, when Lisa decided to explore the basement of the main house. The contractors had said it was structurally sound, just old and dusty. She needed to check if they could store anything down there while the upstairs was being repaired. The basement stairs creaked with every step. Lisa used her phone's flashlight to see in the dim space. Most of the basement was empty except for some old furniture covered in dust sheets and a collection of wine barrels that looked like they hadn't been used in decades. But as Lisa moved deeper into the basement, she noticed something strange. The back wall didn't look quite right. Where the other walls were made of stone, this section looked like it had been built with different materials, almost like someone had sealed off part of the basement. She ran her hands along the wall, feeling for loose stones or gaps. Behind one of the old wine barrels, she found what felt like a wooden door, completely hidden behind years of dust and spider webs. Lisa's heart started beating faster. She pushed against the wood, and to her surprise it moved slightly. The door wasn't locked, just stuck from years of not being opened. It took some work, but she managed to pull the door open enough to squeeze through. Her phone light revealed a small room that looked like it had been sealed away for years. The air smelled old and musty, but not unpleasant. The room was full of wooden shelves, and the shelves were full of books and journals. Lisa picked up one of the journals carefully, afraid it might fall apart in her hands. The leather cover was worn but still solid, and when she opened it, she found pages and pages of handwritten notes. The writing was beautiful, clearly done with care and attention. At the top of the first page, in elegant script, it said, "Property of Isabella Rose, 1943. Lisa felt like she had discovered buried treasure. She carefully gathered several of the journals and took them back upstairs where Amy was making lunch in their tiny cottage kitchen. "Mom, you look like you've seen a ghost," Amy said, looking up from her sandwich. "I think I might have," Lisa replied, setting the journals on their small table. "Look what I found." Amy's eyes went wide as Lisa explained about the hidden room. Together, they carefully opened the first journal and began to read. Isabella Rose had beautiful handwriting and a talent for detailed observation. The journal entry started in 1943, when Isabella was apparently a young woman who had just moved to the Vineyard with her new husband. But as Lisa and Amy read deeper, they realized this wasn't just a normal diary. Isabella was writing about grape growing, winemaking, and farming techniques with the precision of a scientist and the passion of an artist. "Listen to this," Amy said, reading from a 1945 entry. "The vines in the south section are struggling because the soil is too compact. I've been adding compost made from kitchen scraps and fallen leaves, mixing it with coffee grounds from town. The improvement is remarkable." Lisa flipped through more pages, amazed by what she was reading. Isabella wrote about weather patterns, soil conditions, and plant health with incredible detail. She had charts showing which sections of the vineyard produced the best grapes and detailed notes about why. But the most interesting discovery came when they found journals from the 1950s. Isabella was writing about techniques that sounded very modern, even though she was doing them decades before anyone else. She was making her own natural pest control, Lisa said, reading an entry from 1952. She planted certain flowers between the grape rows because they attracted insects that ate the bad bugs. She figured out which plants helped the soil stay healthy. Amy found entries about composting methods, natural fertilizers, and ways to conserve water that sounded like things people were just starting to talk about in farming magazines today. "Mom, this Isabella woman was way ahead of her time," Amy said. She was doing organic farming before it was even called that. As they read more, they learned that Isabella had run the vineyard mostly by herself. Her husband traveled for business and left the farming to her. In the 1960s entries, Isabella wrote about winning awards for her wines. But she was frustrated because her husband always accepted the recognition publicly, while she did all the actual work. The journals revealed a brilliant woman who loved the land and understood it in ways that seemed almost magical. She wrote about how different sections of the vineyard had different personalities, how the morning fog affected the grapes differently than afternoon sun, and how to tell what the vines needed just by looking at their leaves. But the most exciting discovery came in a journal from 1978. Isabella wrote about preparing for her retirement and worrying about what would happen to the vineyard after she was gone. "The new farming methods are all about chemicals and machines," she wrote. "People think bigger and faster is always better. But I've learned that the land needs patience and understanding, not force." Lisa read the next part out loud to Amy. "I've decided to create a backup plan. If someone ever comes along who really wants to understand this place, I'm going to leave them everything they need to bring it back to life." The journal went on to describe how Isabella had spent months creating detailed maps of the vineyard. She had buried special containers throughout the property, each one containing soil samples, seeds, and detailed instructions for restoring different sections of the land. "She made like a treasure map," Amy said excitedly. "But instead of gold, she buried the secrets to making this place work again." Lisa felt goosebumps on her arms as she read Isabella's final entries in that journal. The older woman had clearly spent years preparing for someone like Lisa to find her work. "I don't know who will find these journals," Isabella had written. "But I hope it's someone who needs this place as much as it needs them. The land remembers everything. All they have to do is listen." That evening, Lisa and Amy spread Isabella's hand-drawn maps across their cottage table. The maps showed the vineyard divided into sections, each marked with symbols and notes. Some sections were marked as needs deep healing, while others were labeled ready for renewal. But the most intriguing marks were small X's scattered throughout the property, each one numbered and dated. According to Isabella's notes, these marked the locations of her buried containers. "We have to find them," Amy said, tracing the map with her finger. "It's going to be like the world's most educational treasure hunt," Lisa agreed. They spent the next morning gathering tools from the old barn: shovels, a metal detector they found, in surprisingly good condition, and a wheelbarrow that still worked despite its age. The first container was buried near the cottage, marked on Isabella's map as Container Number 1, Foundation Knowledge. It took them 2 hours of digging before Amy's shovel hit something solid. The container was a large clay pot, carefully sealed, with wax. Inside, they found smaller glass jars filled with different types of soil, packets of seeds wrapped in waxed paper, and detailed typed instructions for testing and improving soil health. But the most amazing part was a letter addressed simply to whoever finds this. Lisa's hands were shaking as she read Isabella's words out loud. "If you're reading this, it means you found your way to my hidden room and decided to believe in what this land can become. That tells me you're the right person to carry on what I started." The letter went on to explain that Isabella had spent her last years creating a complete system for restoring the vineyard using only natural methods. Each buried container held pieces of the puzzle: specific seeds for soil improvement, samples of healthy earth from the best sections, and detailed instructions for bringing damaged land back to life. "She knew," Lisa said softly. Somehow she knew that someone would come along who needed exactly what she had to offer. Amy was already studying the typed instructions, her excitement growing. "Mom, this is like having a personal teacher who understood this exact piece of land better than anyone else ever has." As the sun set on their first treasure hunting day, Lisa and Amy sat on the cottage porch, looking out over the tangled vineyard. But now, instead of seeing an overwhelming mess, Lisa was beginning to see potential. Somewhere out there, buried, in 17 different locations, Isabella had left them a complete guide to bringing this place back to life. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but for the first time since they'd arrived, Lisa felt like they actually had a chance to succeed. Isabella Rose had waited 40 years for the right person to find her legacy. Lisa was determined not to let her down. Finding Isabella's buried containers became Lisa and Amy's daily adventure. Every morning after breakfast, they would study the hand-drawn maps and choose which treasure to hunt for next. Some containers were easy to find, buried in obvious spots, near old fence posts or distinctive trees. Others required hours of searching and careful measuring. Container number 7 was buried near what Isabella called the heart of the vineyard, a small hill in the center of the property where the oldest grapevines still grew wild. When they finally dug it up after a full day of searching, Lisa understood why Isabella had called it the heart. Inside this container were soil samples that looked completely different from anything else they had found. The earth was dark and rich, almost black, and it smelled fresh and alive even after being buried for decades. Isabella's notes explained that this soil came from the original vineyard, before any chemicals or modern farming methods had been used. "This is what the whole place used to be like," Lisa said, holding a handful of the rich earth. Isabella saved a piece of the original land. Amy was reading the detailed instructions that came with each container. "She says if we mix this soil with the right plants and compost, we can slowly spread it to heal the damaged sections." But the most exciting discovery came in container number 12. Along with the usual soil samples and seeds, they found something unexpected: letters and documents that told a much bigger story about Isabella and the vineyard. The papers revealed that Isabella hadn't just been a talented farmer. She had been part of a quiet network of women who were revolutionizing agriculture in the 1950s and 60s. These women shared knowledge through letters, trading seeds and techniques that their husbands and the farming community often dismissed as unimportant. One letter, dated 1961, was from a woman named Ruth who ran a farm in Oregon. "Isabella, your method of using companion plants to control pests worked perfectly in our apple orchard. I'm sending you seeds from a new variety of clover that my grandmother brought from Ireland. Try it between your grape rows." Another letter came from someone called Dorothy in Napa Valley. "The wine tasters in San Francisco are starting to notice that our natural methods produce better flavors. Maybe someday people will understand that working with the land instead of fighting it makes everything better." Lisa realized that Isabella had been part of something much larger than one small vineyard. These women had been quietly developing sustainable farming methods decades before anyone called it that. As word spread through the local community about Lisa's project, reactions were mixed. Some neighbors were curious and supportive, stopping by to see what she was doing and offering advice. But others seemed less welcoming. The biggest challenge came from Robert Sterling, who owned the large commercial vineyard next door. His property was 10 times bigger than Lisa's, with neat rows of vines, modern equipment, and tour buses that brought visitors every day. Robert had been farming the same way for 20 years, using all the latest chemicals and technology. When he heard that Lisa was trying to restore her vineyard using old-fashioned organic methods, he wasn't impressed. "You can't make a living farming the way people did 50 years ago," he told Lisa when he stopped by one morning. "Modern methods exist for a reason. They're more efficient and more profitable." Lisa tried to be polite, but she could tell Robert thought she was wasting her time. What worried her more was when he mentioned that several other commercial vineyards in the area were expanding, and her property would be valuable for development if she ever wanted to sell. "I'm not planning to sell," Lisa said firmly. "Everyone says that at first," Robert replied with a knowing smile. "But when the bills start adding up and you realize how hard this business really is, you might change your mind." After Robert left, Lisa felt discouraged. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was being foolish to think she could succeed where others had failed. But that same afternoon, she received an unexpected visitor who changed everything. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a soil scientist from the State University, had heard about Lisa's project through a colleague and wanted to see what she was doing. "I've been studying sustainable farming methods for 15 years, Dr. Walsh explained as Lisa showed her around the property. What you're describing sounds like techniques that are just now being recognized as cutting edge. When Lisa showed her the soil samples from Isabella's containers, Dr. Walsh got visibly excited. She asked if she could take some samples back to her lab for testing. If these results are what I think they might be, you could be sitting on something really special, she said. Dr. Walsh returned 2 weeks later with test results that amazed even her. The soil samples from Isabella's containers showed incredible diversity of beneficial microorganisms, tiny living things that help plants grow strong and healthy. This level of soil health is extraordinary, Dr. Walsh explained. Most commercial vineyards have soil that's been depleted by years of chemical treatments, but your samples show the kind of complex ecosystem that takes decades to develop naturally. She went on to explain that universities around the country were spending millions of dollars trying to figure out how to restore soil health in damaged farmland. Isabella had apparently figured it out through careful observation and patience. Would you be interested in participating in a research study? Dr. Walsh asked. We could document your restoration process and maybe learn something that could help other farmers, Lisa agreed immediately. Having university support would give her project credibility and might help with funding. As Lisa began implementing Isabella's restoration methods, she discovered she wasn't alone in her struggle. Through online forums and social media, she connected with other small-scale farmers who were trying to do things differently. Amy had been documenting their journey through photos and videos, posting regularly about their discoveries and progress. Her posts about finding Isabella's containers and restoring the soil attracted attention from people around the world who were interested in sustainable farming. Mom, look at this, Amy said one evening, showing Lisa her phone. Someone from France shared our post about companion planting, and this farmer from Australia wants to know more about Isabella's pest control methods. Through these online connections, Lisa found a community of people who understood what she was trying to do. They shared advice, offered encouragement, and celebrated each other's successes. One of her new online friends was a woman named Helen, who was restoring an old farm in Vermont. Helen had been working on her project for 3 years and had learned a lot about dealing with skeptical neighbors and financial challenges. The hardest part isn't the farming, Helen wrote in one of their long email exchanges. It's believing in yourself when everyone else thinks you're crazy. But every small success proves that you're on the right path. Lisa also connected with Tom, a former engineer who had bought an abandoned orchard in Washington state. Tom shared Lisa's interest in combining old farming wisdom with modern scientific understanding. I think people like us are part of a quiet revolution, Tom wrote. We're proving that small-scale, sustainable farming isn't just possible, it's necessary for the future. These connections became a lifeline for Lisa during the difficult months of restoration. When money was tight, when the work seemed overwhelming, when neighbors like Robert made her doubt herself, she could turn to this community of like-minded people who understood her vision. Amy's social media following grew steadily as she documented their progress. Her videos of digging up Isabella's containers got thousands of views, and her posts about soil restoration attracted comments from farming students, environmental scientists, and other people interested in sustainable agriculture. The online attention also brought unexpected opportunities. A company that made organic fertilizer offered to donate products in exchange for documentation of how well they worked. A tool manufacturer sent them professional-grade equipment to test and review. Most importantly, Amy set up a crowdfunding campaign to help with restoration costs. She wasn't expecting much, but the response was overwhelming. People from around the world contributed small amounts, and many left messages of encouragement. Your story gives me hope that there are still people willing to do things the right way, wrote one contributor from Canada. I lost my family farm 20 years ago because we couldn't compete with industrial agriculture, wrote another. Thank you for proving that there's still a place for farms like ours. The funding campaign raised enough money to cover several months of expenses, giving Lisa breathing room to focus on the restoration work instead of constantly worrying about bills. Winter approached. Lisa and Amy had found 14 of Isabella's 17 containers. Each discovery had taught them something new about the land and about Isabella herself. They had also begun to see real changes in the soil and plants where they had implemented her methods. The section where they had first applied Isabella's soil restoration techniques was showing signs of new life. The grapevines that had been struggling and diseased were beginning to look healthier. The soil, which had been hard and lifeless, was becoming softer and darker. Dr. Walsh visited regularly to document the changes and collect samples for her research. Each visit brought more encouraging news about the soil's improvement. "What you're accomplishing here could change how we think about agricultural restoration," she told Lisa during one visit. Isabella was apparently a genius who was decades ahead of her time. Robert Sterling had stopped by a few more times, always with the same message about selling the property for development. But Lisa's confidence was growing with each small success. She was beginning to believe that Isabella's methods might actually work, and that she and Amy might actually succeed in bringing the vineyard back to life. As they sat by the fire in their cottage one cold evening, Amy looked up from her laptop where she was editing their latest video. "Mom, do you ever wonder if Isabella somehow knew we would be the ones to find her containers?" Lisa thought about it for a moment. "Sometimes it feels that way, like everything we've discovered was meant for us specifically." They still had 3 containers to find and years of work ahead of them. But for the first time since they had arrived at the vineyard, Lisa felt confident that they were exactly where they were supposed to be. 2 years had passed since Lisa and Amy first stood in shock looking at their broken-down vineyard. Now, standing in the same spot on a bright spring morning, Lisa could hardly believe the transformation. The wild, tangled mess had become organized, rows of healthy grapevines stretching across rolling hills. The old Victorian house stood proud and beautiful, its paint fresh and windows sparkling in the morning sun. The change hadn't happened overnight. It had taken months of backbreaking work, countless sleepless nights worrying about money, and more faith than Lisa had ever thought she possessed. But Isabella's methods had worked better than anyone could have imagined. Amy was now 19 and had decided to delay college for another year to help launch their wine business. What had started as her mother's desperate escape from divorce had become a shared passion that brought them closer than they had ever been. "Mom, remember when we thought that barn was going to fall down?" Amy said, pointing to the structure that now served as their wine production facility. They had restored it carefully, keeping its rustic character while adding modern equipment for making wine. Lisa smiled, remembering how terrified they had been of everything back then. Now the barn was the heart of their operation, filled with stainless steel tanks, oak barrels, and the sweet smell of fermenting grapes. The final 3 containers had been the hardest to find, but also the most important. Container 15 had been buried beneath the old oak tree near the house, and it contained Isabella's most precious secrets, her grandmother's grape varieties that had been brought from Italy in the 1890s. These weren't grapes you could buy from any supplier. They were rare varieties that had been carefully preserved through generations of women who understood their value. When Lisa and Amy planted these special grapes using Isabella's restoration methods, the results were extraordinary. Dr. Walsh had been visiting regularly to document the soil transformation, and her research was attracting attention from universities around the world. The soil that had been dead and depleted 3 years ago now teemed with life. Earthworms, beneficial insects, and microscopic organisms had returned to create a complex ecosystem that supported incredibly healthy plants. "What you've accomplished here is being called revolutionary," Dr. Walsh told Lisa during her latest visit. "We're seeing soil regeneration that typically takes decades happening in just a few years. Isabella's methods combined with your dedication have created something special." The proof was in the wine itself. Lisa and Amy's first vintage, made from grapes grown using Isabella's techniques, had surprised everyone, including themselves. When they nervously submitted bottles to regional wine competitions, they never expected to win anything. But their Pinot Noir had won gold medals at 3 different competitions, and their Chardonnay had earned recognition from wine critics in San Francisco. More importantly, people who tasted their wine said they could taste something different, a depth and complexity that came from healthy soil and careful farming. Word spread quickly through wine country. Restaurants began calling to ask about buying their wines. Wine enthusiasts drove hours to visit their small tasting room in the restored Victorian house. Tour groups started including their vineyard on wine country visits, not because they were the biggest operation, but because their story was so compelling. Robert Sterling, the neighbor who had been so skeptical 3 years earlier, had to admit he was impressed. His commercial vineyard was still successful, but he had started asking Lisa questions about her organic methods. "I'll be honest," he told her during a recent conversation, "I didn't think you had a chance. But what you've done here is remarkable. Maybe there's something to these old-fashioned techniques after all." Lisa appreciated his change of heart, but she was most proud of what their success meant for other small farmers. The online community that had supported them during their difficult early months had grown into a network of hundreds of people around the world who were learning from each other. Amy's videos documenting their journey had been watched by millions of people. Her most popular video, showing the transformation from tangled vineyard to thriving farm, had over 2 million views and thousands of comments from people inspired to try their own agricultural projects. "Look at this message," Amy said one evening, reading from her laptop. "It's from a family in Ohio who bought an abandoned farm after watching our videos. They found old journals in their barn too, and they're using techniques similar to Isabella's to restore their land." These connections had led to something Lisa never expected. With help from Dr. Walsh and several university partners, they had established the Isabella Rose Foundation, dedicated to preserving traditional farming knowledge and helping small farmers access the resources they needed to farm sustainably. The foundation offered grants to people trying to restore damaged farmland, maintained a library of historical farming documents, and connected modern farmers with traditional techniques that had been nearly forgotten. "Isabella would be amazed to know that her methods are now being taught in agriculture classes," Amy said as they worked together in the vineyard one morning, training new grapevines to grow on their support wires. Lisa often thought about Isabella while she worked in the vineyard. Sometimes she felt like the older woman was still there, guiding her decisions and sharing her wisdom. The connection was strongest in the early morning hours when mist rose from the soil and the grape leaves sparkled with dew. The financial stress that had kept Lisa awake so many nights was finally gone. Their wines sold for premium prices because people understood they were getting something special. Not just good wine, but wine made with care for the land and respect for traditional methods. They had also developed additional income streams that Isabella probably never imagined. Amy had started offering workshops for people interested in sustainable farming. They sold seeds and soil amendments made using Isabella's techniques to other farmers around the country. The foundation brought in grants and donations from people who believed in their mission. Most surprisingly, they had become destination for agricultural tourists. People came from around the world to see their soil restoration project and learn about Isabella's methods. Some visitors were farmers looking for alternatives to industrial agriculture. Others were simply curious about sustainable living. Lisa had also returned to teaching, but in a completely different way. Instead of a traditional classroom, she now taught courses on sustainable agriculture at the State University. Students came to the vineyard for hands-on learning about soil health, organic farming, and business management. "You're living proof that it's possible to farm profitably while taking care of the land," one of her students told her after a particularly successful harvest. "That gives me hope for the future of agriculture." Amy had decided to study agricultural, business, and sustainable farming when she finally went to college, but she planned to continue living at the vineyard and help run the operation. The gap years that had started as a necessity had become a choice that shaped her entire future. "Used to think I wanted to live in a big city and have an exciting career," Amy told Lisa as they walked through the vineyard one evening. "But I can't imagine doing anything more important than what we're doing here." The transformation went beyond just the land and the business. Lisa felt like a completely different person than the scared, heartbroken woman who had bought the vineyard 3 years earlier. The work had given her confidence, purpose, and a deep sense of connection to something larger than herself. The divorce that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of the life she was meant to live. She was healthier, happier, and more fulfilled than she had ever been during her marriage, Amy had grown from a worried teenager into a confident young woman with clear goals and strong values. The challenges they had faced together had made their relationship stronger and deeper than Lisa had ever imagined possible. On the third anniversary of their arrival at the Vineyard, they hosted a celebration that brought together everyone who had supported their journey. Dr. Walsh came with several of her research colleagues. Farmers from their online network traveled from other states to attend. Local neighbors who had become friends and supporters joined the party. Even Robert Sterling attended, bringing a bottle of wine from his own vineyard and admitting that he had started experimenting with some organic methods in one section of his property. As the sun set over the vineyard, Lisa stood with Amy on the porch of the Victorian house, looking out over everything they had built together. The grapevines stretched in perfect rows toward the mountains, heavy with fruit that would become their next vintage. "Do you think Isabella knew what would happen when she buried those containers?" Amy asked, echoing a question they had discussed many times. "I think she hoped," Lisa replied. "I think she believed that if she preserved what she had learned, someday the right person would find it and carry it forward." Lisa had found Isabella's final journal entry just a few weeks earlier, hidden in the last container they discovered. The words had brought tears to her eyes. "To whoever finds this vineyard broken and decides to heal it, you are braver than you know. The land will test you, but it will also reward you in ways you cannot imagine. Trust the soil. Trust the vines. Trust yourself. And remember that healing the land will heal you too." As guests laughed and talked around them, sharing stories and making plans for future collaborations, Lisa realized that Isabella's legacy had grown far beyond what any of them had imagined. The vineyard was thriving, but more importantly, it had become a symbol of hope for people everywhere who believed that small actions could create big changes. The scared, divorced mother who had risked everything on a broken-down vineyard had discovered that sometimes the biggest risks led to the most beautiful transformations. She had found her purpose, her community, and herself in the rich soil of an old vineyard that had been waiting patiently for someone who would listen to what it had to teach.